I still remember the day my car broke down on that empty country road. It was raining so hard that the sky looked like it was crying with me. My hands were trembling as I stood there, stranded, miles from town, wondering why everything in my life seemed to fall apart at once. The rain soaked through my clothes, cold and unforgiving, as if the world wanted to remind me how small I really was. My phone battery was dying. The engine refused to start, and I could feel panic clawing at my chest. That's when I saw the headlights appear through the storm, a small truck pulling over beside me. A man stepped out, his jacket glistening with rain, his face partly hidden under a cap. "Need some help, miss?" he asked in a calm, deep voice. There was something oddly familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. He looked like any other. Mechanic grease-stained hands, rough work boots, quiet confidence. I hesitated for a second, clutching my purse tighter. But desperation won. "Yes, please," I said, my voice breaking a little. He gave a faint smile and popped open the hood, his movements precise and practiced. The sound of tools clicking filled the silence between us. I stood there shivering, watching him work, noticing how gentle his eyes were when he spoke. "You should have replaced this belt weeks ago," he murmured, his tone more like someone who cared than a stranger. Within minutes, the engine roared back to life. Relief washed over me so quickly I almost cried. "Thank you," I said, handing him a few bills, but he shook his head. "No charge. Just be careful next time." He smiled, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of something in his face, something warm, something I'd seen before in another lifetime. But before I could ask, he was already walking back to his truck. The rain had stopped, but my heart hadn't. As his taillights disappeared into the fog, I felt a strange pull inside me, a whisper from the past I didn't want to remember. Because years ago, I'd broken the heart of a man with those same kind eyes, a man who once told me he'd prove his worth someday. The next morning, I couldn't shake the memory of that mechanic's face. It followed me through breakfast, through work, through the long hours of pretending everything in my life was fine. I kept replaying his voice in my head, the way he said, "Be careful next time," as if he merely knew me. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The man I once rejected, Daniel, was gone from my life years ago. He was kind, humble, and full of dreams I didn't believe in back then. He wanted to start a small repair business, and I wanted a future that glittered, not one covered in engine oil. I left him because I thought I deserved more success, more comfort, more prestige. But as the years passed, the people I chose over him disappeared when things got tough, leaving me with debts, heartbreak, and a loneliness I didn't know how to fix. That night, I drove back toward the same road, hoping maybe I'd find that mechanic again. I told myself it was just to thank him properly, but deep down, I wanted to see his eyes again, to be sure. I parked near the small service station at the edge of town, where an old sign read, "Hilltop Auto Repairs." The place looked like it hadn't changed in years. Rusted gates, faint smell of oil, tools scattered on wooden tables. Inside, I saw him, bent over an engine, the sleeves of his flannel shirt rolled up, his hands steady and skilled. "You, again," he said without looking up, his tone carrying a hint of amusement. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" I froze, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. "I just wanted to thank you properly," I said, forcing a smile. When he finally looked at me, my breath caught. It was Daniel. The same Daniel I once loved, the same man I told wasn't good enough for me. Except now, there was something different about him. His eyes were calmer, more confident, but colder too, like he'd learned to stop waiting for apologies. "You're welcome," he said simply, wiping his hands. "Glad you made it home safe." My heart pounded in my chest as I whispered, "Daniel, is it really you?" He nodded slowly. It's been a long time, hasn't it, Claire? And just like that, the past I'd buried came crashing back into the present. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. It was as if time had folded in on itself, dragging me back to the night I told him goodbye. Back then, he stood on my porch, holding a small box with a silver bracelet inside, his hands trembling as he said he wanted to spend his life with me. I remember laughing nervously, saying he needed to dream bigger, that love wasn't enough without success. The way his face fell that night still haunted me, but I'd convinced myself it was for the best. And now, years later, he stood in front of me again, but this time, he didn't look like the man who needed saving. He looked like the man who had already saved himself. You look different, I said awkwardly, trying to fill the heavy silence. You too, he replied, his eyes briefly softening before turning away. He motioned toward the chairs by the counter. You want some coffee? The smell of fresh brew filled the air as he poured 2 cups, his movements calm and precise. So, what happened to you after everything? I asked quietly, my fingers tightening around the warm mug. He shrugged. I worked, failed a few times, learned more than I ever did in school, built something out of nothing. I smiled faintly. You always were stubborn. He chuckled, but there was no real humor in it. Yeah, guess that's what it takes. The conversation felt both familiar and strange, like revisiting a song you used to love, but no longer know the words to. Before I left, I reached into my bag and handed him a small card. If you ever need marketing help for your shop, call me. I'm freelancing now. He took it, his fingers brushing mine for just a second, sending a shiver through me. Thanks, Claire. I'll think about it, he said, his tone polite but distant. As I walked out into the fading sunlight, I couldn't stop glancing back at him through the glass window. Part of me wished I could explain why I left, why I'd been so afraid of a simple life. But the other part of me feared that maybe it was too late. What I didn't know then was that the man I'd once rejected wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was about to reveal a truth that would turn my entire world upside down. A week later, I was at a business networking event in the city, nervously clutching a glass of champagne while pretending to belong among people who never truly saw me. My freelance work wasn't going great, bills were piling up, and my confidence was crumbling faster than I could rebuild it. The host walked onto the stage to introduce the keynote speaker, a self-made billionaire who had transformed a small-town repair shop into a global chain of eco-friendly automotive centers. The crowd applauded as the name echoed through the hall. Please welcome Mr. Daniel Hayes. My heart stopped. I blinked, certain I'd misheard, but then I saw him. Daniel, wearing a tailored suit, his posture straight, his confidence radiating through the room like light. He smiled at the audience, the same quiet smile I'd once fallen for, and began speaking about perseverance, failure, and the value of hard work. I could barely breathe. The same man who'd fixed my car in the rain, the same man I'd rejected for being too simple, was now standing before hundreds of powerful people, admired and respected. My hands trembled as I clutched my bag tighter, trying to process what I was seeing. Every word he said cut deeper, not because he was being cruel, but because I could hear the echo of what I'd thrown away. When the speech ended, people rushed to greet him, but his eyes found mine across the crowd. For a brief moment, we just stared at each other, the noise fading into nothing. He excused himself from the crowd and walked straight toward me. Claire, he said softly, his tone calm but unreadable. You came. I swallowed hard. I didn't know you were this. He smiled faintly. I didn't know I'd ever see you again. We stood there, surrounded by glittering people who had no idea of our history, and I felt smaller than I ever had before. Why didn't you tell me that day at the shop? I whispered. His expression didn't change. Because I wanted to see if you'd treat me the same way you did years ago." The words hit like a punch to the chest. He turned to leave, but before he did, he said quietly, "Looks like some lessons take longer to learn." After that night, I couldn't sleep. His words played over and over in my mind like a haunting melody that refused to fade. I kept asking myself why it hurt so much. Was it guilt, regret, or something deeper that I'd buried long ago? The truth was, I had spent so many years chasing validation from people who only cared about appearances. I wanted to prove that I was successful, that leaving Daniel was the right decision. But now that illusion was shattered. He had become everything I thought I wanted in life, and I was standing in the ruins of my own choices. The next morning, I drove to Hilltop Auto Repairs again, unsure if he'd even be there. The place looked busier this time, new cars, new tools, workers moving with quiet discipline. A large poster hung near the entrance. Hayes Automotive Group, founded by Daniel Hayes. My heart sank. It was his company, his empire, and this was just one of the many small stations he kept to stay connected to where it all began. I walked in slowly, feeling like an intruder in a memory. He was inside, talking to one of the employees, dressed casually, but with that same unshakable confidence. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in curiosity. "You're persistent," he said, wiping his hands. "I just needed to talk," I replied softly. He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "About what?" I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. "About us. About that night. I shouldn't have said the things I did back then. I was stupid and scared." He studied me quietly, his expression unreadable. "People change," he said finally. "You don't owe me an apology." But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe that. "I do owe you," I whispered, "because you were the only person who ever believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." For a moment, his composure faltered. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Claire, you don't need to dig up the past. What's done is done." His voice was calm, but I could feel the wall between us, solid and unmovable. I nodded, blinking back tears. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but some things deserve to be said even if it's too late." Daniel didn't respond right away. The sound of the rain tapping against the metal roof filled the silence between us, just like that night when he'd rescued me on the roadside. For a few seconds, his eyes softened, and I thought I saw a glimpse of the man I used to know, the dreamer who'd once promised me the world without a cent in his pocket. But then, he straightened his posture and spoke in that calm, measured tone that carried the weight of success. "Claire, I spent years trying to understand why you left. I used to think it was because I wasn't enough. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought I could, trying to become someone you wouldn't walk away from." His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain beneath it. And then one day, I realized I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. "I built all this," he gestured around the workshop, "for me, not to win you back, not to make you regret it, but to prove to myself that I could." His words sliced through the air like a blade, clean and sharp. I felt my throat tighten. "Daniel, I never meant to hurt you," I said, my voice trembling. "I was young, and I thought love wasn't enough without money or success. I thought I was being practical." He gave a quiet laugh, not cruel, but full of disbelief. "Practical," he repeated. "Yeah, I remember you saying that. Funny thing is, you were right about one thing. Money changes everything. It changes how people see you, how they treat you, how they pretend to care." He looked straight at me, his gaze intense. "But it doesn't change what matters." I swallowed hard, realizing just how much I had lost, not just him, but the version of myself that had once believed in something real. "I wish I could go back," I whispered. "I'd choose differently." He shook his head slowly. "No, Claire, don't wish that, because maybe if you hadn't left, I wouldn't have become this." His words carried no pride, only truth, and as I stood there, surrounded by everything he'd built from the pieces I'd left behind, I realized that life had already given me my lesson. It just came wrapped in the success of the man I once underestimated. I left the workshop that day with my heart heavier than ever. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt gray, as if the clouds refused to let the sun touch me. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, thinking about how cruel time could be. Daniel had grown into everything I once dreamed of, a man with purpose, strength, and grace, but I wasn't part of his story anymore. I started the engine, but instead of driving home, I found myself wandering through the city, passing by the life I had once built from illusions. My phone buzzed with notifications from clients who barely respected me, deadlines that meant nothing, and people who used to admire me when I had something to offer. I turned it off. For the first time in years, I wanted silence. Days passed, but my thoughts stayed tangled around Daniel. I replayed every moment we'd ever shared, every laugh, every fight, every promise I'd broken. It wasn't regret that hurt the most, it was knowing that he had found peace while I was still chasing pieces of myself. One evening, as I was scrolling through an article online, his name appeared again. Daniel Hayes announces new foundation to support women entrepreneurs. I clicked it instantly. There he was, smiling at the camera, surrounded by women presenting their projects, his caption reading, "Everyone deserves a second chance at building their dream." My chest tightened. Those words felt like they were written for me, even if they weren't. Impulsively, I decided to attend one of his foundation's open events. I didn't know if he'd even talk to me again, but I needed to see him to tell him that I was proud, that he'd become everything I once told him he couldn't be. The night of the event, I stood in the corner of the crowded hall, watching him greet guests, shake hands, and smile genuinely, not like someone pretending. When his eyes finally found mine across the room, something shifted. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he walked toward me slowly, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "You came," he said again. That same calm voice, but softer this time. "I told you," I whispered. "Some things deserve to be said, even if it's too late." Daniel looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching mine as though he was trying to decide whether to let the past breathe again. The noise of the crowd faded around us, replaced by the faint hum of music and the clinking of glasses. "You really think it's too late?" he asked finally, his voice low, steady. I hesitated, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I needed to tell you that I see it now. What I threw away, what I didn't understand. You were never small, Daniel." I was. His eyes softened, but he didn't interrupt. Back then, I thought success was shiny cars, big houses, people who clapped when you entered a room. I didn't see that real success is being proud of who you are, even when no one's watching. He nodded slowly, as if each word I spoke was being measured carefully. "It took me years to learn that, too," he said. "I used to think proving people wrong would heal me, but it didn't. I just learned how to let go." He looked around the room filled with people whose lives he was changing. "I built all this because I wanted to create something that mattered. Not because I wanted revenge. But seeing you here, maybe part of me still needed closure." His honesty cut through the tension like light breaking through clouds. I took a shaky breath. "Then maybe that's what we both came here for," I said softly. He smiled faintly, a bittersweet curve that carried years of pain and forgiveness. "You know," he said, glancing toward the stage, "I never stopped wondering if you'd find your way. You had something in you, Claire. You just lost faith in it." His words hit me harder than any insult ever could. They weren't cruel, they were true. I blinked back tears and whispered, "I'm trying to find it again." Daniel's gaze lingered for a moment before he extended his hand. "Then maybe this is where you start." I hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand. It wasn't an invitation to return to the past, it was a gesture of peace, of growth. And as I placed my hand in his, something inside me finally began to heal. When his hand touched mine, it felt like time paused, not in a way that dragged me back into what we used to be, but in a way that reminded me that forgiveness could be its own kind of love. The noise of the crowd faded completely, leaving just the two of us standing under the warm lights, silent but understood. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of who I was. Daniel didn't owe me a second chance, yet somehow, in that moment, I knew he was giving me one not as the man I once loved, but as someone who saw that I was finally ready to grow. "Would you like to see what the foundation really does?" he asked gently, and I nodded, following him through the side door into a smaller room filled with women working on designs, prototypes, and sketches. He walked between them, greeting each one by name, listening, encouraging, guiding. The pride in his eyes wasn't for his success, it was for theirs. Watching him, I realized that the man I left behind had become something far greater than I ever imagined. He wasn't chasing wealth. He was building meaning. This, he said softly, gesturing around the room, is what I always dreamed of. Helping people who remind me of where I came from, the ones who were told they'd never make it. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling. You've changed so many lives, Daniel. He smiled slightly. Including yours, maybe? I nodded, tears forming in my eyes. You already have. He studied me quietly for a moment. You know, I don't hate you, Claire. I never did. I was angry. Sure, but I understood. You wanted more, and I hadn't found my place yet. Maybe we both needed to lose each other to find ourselves. His words carried such quiet wisdom that they left me speechless. The years of bitterness I had clung to dissolved into something softer, almost peaceful. Thank you, I whispered, for not turning away when you had every reason to. He shook his head gently. Maybe you're not the same person who left. I smiled through my tears. No, I think she finally grew up. For the first time in so long, I felt whole again. Weeks passed after that night, and something inside me began to shift. I started helping out at Daniel's foundation, volunteering a few hours each day to teach small business marketing to women who were just learning how to believe in themselves again. Every face I saw reflected a part of who I used to be, hopeful, uncertain, but ready to fight for a better life. Daniel and I didn't talk about the past anymore. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a fragile peace built not on what we had lost, but on what we had learned. Sometimes he'd stop by my desk to ask how things were going, and our eyes would meet for just a moment too long, full of memories that no longer hurt. Other times, he'd be on the other side of the room, talking to a group of investors or new applicants, his voice steady and sure, and I'd catch myself smiling quietly. I didn't know if life would ever bring us back together, but I had stopped waiting for that. What mattered was that we had both found our purpose again, his in giving others a chance, mine in rediscovering my strength. One afternoon, as I packed up to leave, Daniel walked over holding a small box. You left this in my truck that night, he said. Inside was my old bracelet, the same one he'd tried to give me years ago, the one I'd left behind when I chose ambition over love. My breath caught as I ran my fingers over it. You kept it? I asked softly. He nodded. I guess part of me always hoped you'd come back for it, not to pick up where we left off, but to remember how far we've come. I smiled, tears glistening in my eyes. Then maybe it's time I finally take it back. As I fastened it around my wrist, it didn't feel like a symbol of regret anymore. It felt like a reminder of growth, of resilience, of everything we had both survived. When I looked up, Daniel was smiling too, calm and proud. Welcome back to yourself, Claire, he said quietly. And for the first time in a long, long while, I truly was.